She felt the impact before she heard the sound. That is how it always is in those fractured moments when the world reveals itself for what it truly is. Not with warning, not with preparation, but with sudden and brutal clarity. One moment Maya Santos was standing in the half-dark of the parking structure on Meridian Street, her arms full of manila folders she had been summoned back to retrieve after 9 hours of work had already ground her down to nothing. The next moment, her head had snapped sideways and her cheek was on fire, and the crack of the slap was still echoing off the concrete pillars like something that had happened to someone else entirely. For 3 full seconds, she did not move. The folders had scattered. Papers fanned across the oil-stained floor in a slow, pale drift, some sliding under the neighboring cars, some settling against the wheel of her 10-year-old Honda like small white flags. She stood with her hair fallen across her face and her hand pressed to the place where Marcus Webb's palm had landed, and she breathed. 1 breath. 2. 3. Do not cry. Not here. Not in front of him. If you are already in this story with me, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Now, let's get back to her. The parking structure on Meridian Street was not the kind of place people lingered after dark. It served the tower above it, a 16-story building of glass and polished steel that housed 4 law firms, 2 investment groups, and, on the 11th floor, the regional headquarters of Webb Development, a real estate empire that Marcus Webb had built over 20 years and treated like his personal kingdom. He owned 3 floors of the building. He owned the view. He owned the narrative of himself as a visionary, a titan, a man whose picture appeared in local magazines beside words like relentless and formidable. What the magazines did not say was that he owned the people around him in the same way. Not legally, but thoroughly. Maya had taken the job 14 months ago because it paid $22 an hour, offered full benefits, and had a schedule that allowed her to drop Lily at kindergarten in the morning and be there for pickup in the afternoon on most days. Most days. She had a daughter who was 5 years old and who had learned to pour her own cereal, and who still sometimes woke in the middle of the night asking for the father who had been gone for 2 years, and Maya needed a job that could hold the weight of both of their lives without crushing her entirely. The position had been listed as executive assistant to the regional director. What that meant in practice was that Maya was responsible for Marcus Webb's calendar, his correspondence, his travel arrangements, his dry cleaning, the particular brand of single malt scotch he kept in the cabinet behind his desk, the silence of everyone around him when he was in a dark mood, and the management of his temper when that silence failed. She had not understood the full scope of the job until her 3rd week, when she watched him berate a junior analyst in the hallway for 45 seconds so precisely and so personally that the young man had gone to the bathroom and not come out for 20 minutes. She should have quit then. She knew that now. But her savings had been nearly gone. Her ex-husband Carlos was 4 months behind on child support and showed no signs of catching up, and Lily had just been diagnosed with mild asthma that required medication Maya could not afford without the insurance that came with this job. So she stayed. She filed it away under the growing category of things she absorbed without letting herself fully feel, right alongside Carlos's silences and the way her landlord had started raising the rent by $50 each time the lease renewed, and the fact that she had not slept a full night in so long she had forgotten what rest it actually felt like. In the first months, Marcus had been demanding but not violent. He snapped. He dismissed. He made comments about her appearance that existed precisely in the space between what a lawyer would call harassment and what he could call casual observation. He was the kind of man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, and the accumulated effect of that was a personality that treated every boundary as a personal offense. The escalation had been gradual. That was how it always worked, Maya would later understand. Not a sudden fall into darkness, but a slow dimming. So incremental that you convinced yourself each new thing was only slightly worse than the last, that it was still within the territory of survivable, that you were strong enough to carry 1 more pound before your knees gave out. By month 6, he had thrown a stapler across the room when she had scheduled a meeting for the wrong Tuesday. It had not been aimed at her. She had told herself that mattered. By month 10, he had grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise when she had interrupted a phone call with information he had asked her to interrupt him for. She had covered it with a cardigan for a week. Tonight had been different. Tonight Marcus had been at a client dinner for 4 hours, and had consumed more scotch than food, and when he returned to the office at 8:30 to collect documents he needed for a morning meeting, he had found that Maya had organized them in the order he had always requested alphabetically by client name within each project folder rather than in a new order he had apparently decided upon sometime during the dinner and had not communicated to anyone. He had communicated it now. He had communicated it at volume in the middle of the office while the cleaning crew tried to become invisible, and then he had told Maya to come down to the parking structure and carry the reorganized folders to his car. She had done it without speaking. She was good at that, at making herself small and efficient and wordless, at moving through the space around his anger like water around a stone. And then, as she was transferring the folders to the back seat of his black Mercedes, she had accidentally let the stack tilt and 3 folders had slid onto the pavement, and Marcus had turned from the driver's side where he had been watching with the particular impatience of a man who considered himself too important for inconvenience, and he had crossed to her side of the car in 2 steps, and he had hit her, open-handed, hard, across the left cheek. The sound of it filled the entire parking level. Now she stood with her hand pressed to her face and the papers spread around her feet, and Marcus Webb straightening his jacket with the calm of a man who had done nothing more notable than swat a fly. "Pick those up," he said. His voice was even. That was the part that would stay with her longest afterward, not the impact, not the sting, but the absolute evenness of those 3 words, as though the violence had been entirely unremarkable to him. As though she were furniture he had arranged, and this was simply the maintenance of the arrangement. Maya crouched down to gather the papers. She did not cry. She would not give him that. Instead, she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone performing a task, organizing the scattered sheets by touch alone, because she was keeping her face down and her breathing steady, and she was counting internally the way she had taught herself to do during the worst moments. 1, 2, 3. In, 1, 2, 3. Out, the same counting she had taught Lily for thunderstorms. She did not notice the black car at the far end of the parking level until she stood. It was a Maybach, parked in a space near the exit column that sat in deep shadow. The engine was running, but the lights were off. She would not have seen it at all except that her eyes, scanning the parking level in that hyper-alert way that bodies move after violence, had caught the faint red ember at the driver's window, a man watching, from the dark, motionless. For a moment the ember did not move. Then the driver's door opened. Dante Caruso had not planned to be in the parking structure on Meridian Street at 8:47 on a Thursday evening. He had been here because Meridian Tower was one of 14 commercial properties in the city that he owned through a layered structure of holding companies and development trusts, none of which carried his name directly, and because one of his financial managers had requested a brief in-person meeting to discuss a lease negotiation on the 3rd floor that was running into complications. The meeting had taken 11 minutes. Dante had been sitting in his car with a glass of water in the cup holder and a financial summary on the seat beside him, reading in the silence that he preferred to noise, when the elevator doors at the far end of the level had opened and a woman had emerged carrying too many folders. He had registered her the way he registered everything automatically, without urgency, filing the information into the category of things that required no action. Woman, late 20s, dark hair, work clothes. End of the day, fetching something from a car. Unremarkable. He had returned to the document. Then the man had followed her out of the elevator. Dante had 20 years of practice at reading the energy of a space before anything visible happened within it. And something in the way the man walked, the particular entitlement of his stride, the way he positioned himself behind her rather than beside her, the quality of the silence between them that was not comfortable but pressurized had made Dante set down the papers. He had watched. He had seen everything. The slap was not the worst thing Dante Caruso had witnessed in his life. Not remotely. He had seen things that made that sound in the concrete garage seem negligible by any objective measure. But there was something about the specificity of it, about the target of it, that had moved through him like a current. She had not screamed, had not flinched away dramatically or crumpled. She had simply absorbed it and crouched down to pick up the papers as though following a well-practiced protocol, and that practiced quality of her endurance was what had unclenched something in Dante's chest and turned it into something colder and more deliberate. He opened his door. He did not hurry. Dante Caruso did not hurry. He moved across the concrete at the same measured pace he brought to everything, and the man 50-something. Expensive suit. The flushed face of someone who had been drinking did not notice him until Dante was already 15 feet away and still closing. "Whose car is this?" Dante asked. His voice was conversational. That was intentional. People who raised their voices in situations like this were people who had not yet learned that the quieter the tone, the more thoroughly it occupied the space around it. Marcus Webb turned. He looked at Dante with the automatic assessment of a man who ranked everyone he met by their net worth and their potential usefulness to him. He took in the code, the car visible through the exit column, and arrived at some conclusion about the appropriate level of dismissal. "Private parking," Marcus said. "Tenants only." "I'm a tenant," Dante said simply. "Is there a problem?" He was not looking at Marcus when he said it. He was looking at the woman. She had straightened. She was holding the folders against her chest like a shield, and her hair was partially obscuring the left side of her face. But the angle of her posture told him she was aware of him in the particular way that people who have just been hurt become aware of strangers, alert and uncertain and not yet convinced that new attention was safe. Marcus's eyes moved between them. "No problem. Just finishing up with my assistant." "Right." Dante let the word sit without anything attached to it. Marcus held the silence for a moment, then reached for the driver's door. "We're done here," he said, and it was unclear whether he meant done with the situation or done with Maya, and perhaps both. He got into his car. The engine turned over. The Mercedes reversed out of the space with the unhurried authority of a man who had never had to check his rearview mirrors for anything that frightened him. Dante watched the car until it had rounded the exit ramp and disappeared. Then he turned to the woman. She was looking at him now. Her hair had shifted slightly, and he could see the red rising on her left cheek, the particular color that came before bruising, and she was gripping the folders with both hands, and her jaw was set in a way that he recognized as someone fighting to hold themselves together through sheer force of will. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." The answer came immediately, reflexively, the answer of someone who had trained themselves to give it regardless of its accuracy. "You don't need to say that to me." She looked at him for a moment, and he could see her recalibrating this stranger who had appeared from nowhere, whose presence had ended the moment, who was now standing in the half-light of a parking garage saying things that did not follow the script she had been handed. "I don't know you," she said. "No. So I don't know why you're still standing there. Checking that you're all right. I told you I was. You told me what you always tell people." He said it without judgment, simply as a statement of something he had observed. "It's a habit. It doesn't mean anything." She stared at him. He held her gaze without moving, without the particular aggressive stillness that men sometimes use to assert themselves, but with a quality of simple attention that was, in its own way, more unsettling. He was simply waiting. He did not appear to have anywhere else to be or anything else to want from her except an honest answer. After a moment, something shifted in her. Expression. Not surrender, not even close to surrender. More like a person lowering a window an inch in a stuffy room. "I have to go," she said. "Do you need help with those?" He nodded at the folders. "No." But her arms were trembling slightly adrenaline. He knew. The body's chemical chaos after a moment of fear, and two of the folders were threatening to slide. He stepped forward and took the two that were tilting, holding them steady without touching her hands, and extended them back toward her when she had redistributed her grip. The exchange took 4 seconds. "Thank you," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "Drive carefully." She moved toward a silver Honda parked 2 spaces from where the Mercedes had been, and he watched her get in and close the door and sit for a moment that she perhaps thought was invisible to him before starting the engine. He could see, through the driver's window glass, the particular compression of someone taking stock of themselves, pressing the back of their hand briefly to their cheek, breathing. Then the Honda's lights came on, and she pulled out and drove toward the ramp, and Dante stood in the empty parking level and listened to the engine sound diminish until it was nothing. He walked back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "Sal," he said when the call connected. "Boss." Salvador Sal had been with him for 11 years and answered within 2 rings regardless of the hour. "The parking structure at Meridian Tower. There are cameras on level 2. I want the last 30 minutes of footage. Tonight. Now." There was a pause, not hesitation, just the sound of Sal already moving. "The tenant database for the building. I need to know every name associated with web development on 11. and find out who the woman was. Dark hair, late 20s, drove a silver Honda Civic out of level 2 approximately 3 minutes ago. She works for Webb. How do you want to run the search? Quietly, Dante set his phone in the cup holder. Sal. Yeah. The man who runs Webb development. What do you know about Marcus Webb? Another pause, longer this time, the sound of someone understanding that a question like this, asked at this particular moment, was not idle curiosity. Enough, Sal said. I can have more by morning. Have it by morning. Dante put the car in gear. He drove out of the parking structure and turned north onto Meridian Street and did not check his mirrors, because he had not survived 20 years in this city by being the kind of man who looked backward. He was already thinking about what came next. Maya drove the 22 minutes home with the radio off and both hands on the wheel, and the particular focused blankness of a person who has decided to stay on the surface of their own mind rather than go anywhere deeper. She parked on the street in front of her building, a 4-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was technically up and coming, though it had been up and coming for as long as she had lived there without actually arriving anywhere. She sat in the car for 30 seconds after cutting the engine. Then she went inside. Mrs. Petrova from the second floor was in the hallway when Maya came through the door, returning from her evening walk with the small white dog, who wore a knitted vest regardless of the season. She was 71 and sharp, and she had an arrangement with Maya that involved $10 an hour and no questions, and she had been watching Lily since 3 in the afternoon. She had pasta, Mrs. Petrova said, handing over the key. She is in bed. She wanted to wait up, but I told her it was too late. She studied Maya for a moment with the precise attention of a woman who had seen considerable amounts of life. You look tired. Long day, Maya said. Mrs. Petrova made a sound that suggested she was not entirely satisfied with this explanation, but had decided not to press it. She gathered her dog and went down the hall, and Maya climbed the last flight of stairs and let herself into the apartment. It was small, and it was hers. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with yellow tiles that she had not chosen, and a window that looked onto the alley and the fire escape. A living room with a second-hand couch covered in a blanket Lily had selected herself at the thrift store, deep purple, patterned with silver moons. Maya had hung Lily's drawings on the refrigerator with the magnet letters Lily used to spell her name in different configurations each morning. There were small purple rain boots beside the door. There was a sippy cup that had been repurposed as a pencil holder on the counter. There was a night light in the shape of a crescent moon plugged in near the bathroom, and its glow reached down the short hallway like a reassurance. Maya went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. The mark on her cheek was darker than she had hoped. Not dramatically, she had developed a talent for concealer in the past year that she would have considered unnecessary in any previous version of her life, but visible in the particular way that bruises were visible in the morning when the blood had finished settling. She pressed her fingertips to it lightly and felt the tenderness and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time without the performance she maintained for everyone else. She was 29 years old. She had a degree in education that she had never used because she had gotten pregnant in her final semester and then married Carlos because they were in love, and that had seemed like the right sequence of events. And then the marriage had lasted 3 years before Carlos had decided that the life they had built together was less interesting than the life he might theoretically build somewhere else with someone newer. She had kept Lily and the apartment and the student debt and the resume gap and the persistent optimism that she had refused to entirely surrender even now, even tonight, even standing in this bathroom pressing her hand to her face. She had told herself for 14 months that the job was temporary, that she was building savings, building towards something better, that Lily's medicine required it, that the math required it, that some things in life had to be endured as a means to an end rather than treated as the end itself. She was still telling herself that. She washed her face, changed into pajamas, and went to check on Lily. Her daughter was asleep on her back with both arms stretched above her head in the universal posture of small children who slept without tension, without the weight of anything that had followed them into the dark. Her dark hair fanned across the pillow. Her mouth was slightly open. One of her stuffed rabbits, the brown one named Edmund, after a character in a book they had read together 4 times, was tucked under her arm with the security of something absolutely relied upon. Maya stood in the doorway for a long time watching her breathe. This was the reason. This was always the reason. She went to bed but did not sleep for a long time. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the building, a television somewhere above her, the distant sound of traffic on the main street, and she thought about the parking garage, about the papers on the floor, about the stranger who had appeared from the far end of the level and spoken in that level, unhurried voice, and taken the two slipping folders from her arms with a steadiness that had felt, absurdly, like something she might cry over if she let herself. She did not know who he was. He had said nothing about himself. He had asked nothing about her that could be answered in facts: no name, no phone number, no what happened or should I call someone. He had simply stayed in the space with her for 4 minutes, long enough that she had not been alone in it, and then let her go without making her feel like she owed him anything for the staying. She did not know what to do with that. She turned over and pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes and eventually slept, and dreamed of nothing she could remember in the morning. Dante was at his desk at 6:15 when Sal's message arrived. He had been awake since 5, as he typically was, a habit formed in his 20s and never broken. The particular wakefulness of someone who had learned that the pre-dawn hours were the only ones in the day when the city's noise dropped low enough that he could think without interference. His apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the Garrison District, a neighborhood of converted industrial spaces and careful architecture that existed at a comfortable remove from the parts of the city where his name was most frequently spoken. The apartment was spare and precise. There were books, a great many of them, organized not by author or title, but by a system that made sense only to him. There were no photographs. There was an espresso machine that had cost more than some cars, and that he operated with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. He read Sal's message once, then read the attached file. Maya Santos, 29. Executive Assistant, Web Development, 11 months in her current role. Previous employment, 6 months at a copywriting firm, 8 months at a school district administrative office before a budget cut ended the position. Before that, a 4-year education degree from state, a marriage and a divorce, a daughter named Lily who was 5 years old and attended kindergarten at Riverside Elementary 3 blocks from their apartment. Sal had included the tenant and employment records, which were straightforward. He had also included something Maya had filed 8 weeks ago, a complaint to the city's Department of Labor regarding a hostile work environment. The complaint had been assigned a case number and then appeared to have stalled, the kind of stalling that happened when a company the size of Web Development had attorneys whose job it was to ensure that stalling. There was a second attachment. Dante opened it. The security footage from Level 2 of the Meridian Tower parking structure was clear. The cameras were the upgraded system Dante had installed 18 months ago when he had acquired the building, and the resolution was sufficient that he could read the expression on Marcus Webb's face when he turned from the driver's side door and crossed to where Maya stood and raised his hand. Dante watched it once. He set down his espresso. He watched it again. He was not a man who performed emotions for himself. He did not narrate his own reactions or catalog his feelings with any great interest. But something in the footage, the particular way Maya did not step back, did not raise her arms, only absorbed the impact, and bent to the floor, settled into him like a weight he had not been carrying a moment before and now could not put down. He had seen this before. Not the specific act, but the specific endurance, the posture of someone who had made a calculation that resistance cost more than absorption, who had survived by learning to take each thing as it came rather than by believing the things would ever stop coming. He had seen it in a particular way in his life, in a context he did not return to often, and the recognition of it now was not comfortable. He closed the file and called Sal. Marcus Webb, he said. Everything. Already started. His company holds 3 floors of Meridian. Plus, he's got a commercial development in the warehouse district that broke ground last spring. He's got city council connections, 2 on the zoning committee OM. His personal life is messier. 2 divorces. The second ended 4 years ago, and there's a sealed section of the court record that cost him enough to suggest it contains something he did not want public. He's got a DUI from 6 years ago that was quietly resolved. Sal paused. He's the kind of man who uses his money the same way other men use their fists. Usually, Dante said, those men eventually use both. That's what the footage suggests. Dante stood and walked to the window. Below, the Garrison district was still quiet, the early morning light falling across the converted brick and the empty street. Somewhere in this city, Maya Santos was waking up and pressing concealer to her cheek and taking her daughter to school and returning to the building where a man had put his hand across her face and would face no consequence for it unless someone decided otherwise. I want to know everything Marcus Webb needs, Dante said. Not what he has, what he needs, what he's afraid of losing, who he owes and who owes him, where the gaps are. You're going after him. I'm learning about him, Dante said. That's different. Sal said nothing to this, which was the response of someone who knew the distinction was primarily semantic. One more thing, Dante said. The complaint Maya Santos filed with the Department of Labor 8 weeks ago. Find out which attorney Webb used to slow walk it, and find out what that attorney needs. And then we'll see. He ended the call and returned to his desk. He did not tell himself a story about what he was doing. He did not dress it in language about justice or obligation or the particular alignment of circumstances that had placed him in that parking structure at exactly the right moment. He was not a man who needed his motivations to be noble in order to act on them. He had simply seen a thing that required addressing, and he was the kind of person who addressed things, and that was sufficient. What he would not examine, not yet, was the way Maya Santos's face had stayed with him, the set of her jaw, the deliberateness of her movements on the floor of the garage, the moment in the car when she had pressed the back of her hand to her cheek in the dark. He filed that under things to return to later and turned his attention to the work. Maya arrived at the office at 8:50. With 7 minutes to spare and enough concealer on her left cheek that she was reasonably certain it would hold through the fluorescent lights of the 11th floor. She had taken Lily to school and bent down to her daughter's level at the kindergarten gate and held her face in both hands for a moment longer than usual, and Lily had said, with the uncomplicated certainty of a 5-year-old, "You smell like the nice soap," and then run off toward her friends without looking back. That had carried Maya through the morning commute. It was still carrying her. The office was its usual configuration of controlled chaos, phones ringing, the junior analysts moving between their desks with the practiced urgency of people who had learned that the appearance of busyness was its own form of protection, the glass-walled conference room already occupied for a 7 o'clock call that had run long. Maya sat at her desk outside Marcus's office and opened her calendar and began the daily process of managing a schedule that belonged to a man who treated other people's time with the contempt of someone who had never been made to wait for anything. Marcus arrived at 9:15. He walked through the office the way he always did without acknowledging anyone in particular, his eyes moving across the space with the proprietary glance of a man surveying what belonged to him. He stopped at Maya's desk. She did not look up from her screen. "The Henley file," he said. "I need it by 10. "It's already on your desk," she said. "I sent it up with the morning packet at 8:30. He made a sound that could have been acknowledgement or dissatisfaction, or simply the noise of a man who never confirmed anything without simultaneously implying it was insufficient. Then he went into his office and closed the door. He did not mention the parking garage, did not acknowledge the previous evening in any register. This was, Maya had learned, how it worked. The incident simply did not exist in the morning. And if she had made the mistake of treating it as existing, of looking at him differently, or speaking carefully, or crying at her desk, she would have been told she was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. So she did not look at him differently. She sat at her desk and answered her phone and managed his calendar and performed, for the benefit of the office around her, the flawless impression of a woman who had slept well. By 11 o'clock, she had almost convinced herself. At 12:15, she went downstairs to the lobby for a coffee from the cart near the elevator bank. It was a small ritual, one of the few reliable pleasures in the structure of her workday. The cart was run by an older man named Pete, who had been there as long as the building had stood, and who gave her an extra shot without being asked, and always said something inconsequential and kind. She was waiting for her cup when she became aware of someone standing at the edge of the lobby, near the building directory. She turned instinctively. The parking garage had left her with a renewed alertness to the presence of people in her peripheral vision, and for a moment, she went very still. It was him. The man from the parking garage was standing at the building directory in a dark coat, apparently reading the floor listings with the unhurried attention of someone who had time for such things. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps the open ceiling of the lobby made proportions different than the compressed space of the parking level. His hair was dark, his posture the particular stillness of someone for whom stillness was a chosen state rather than a default one. He had not seen her, or appeared not to have seen her. Pete said her name, "Maya, here you go," and she took the cup automatically, her eyes still on the man across the lobby. He turned, as though the sound had reached him, and their eyes met across 30 feet of marble floor. He did not smile, did not wave, did not perform surprise. He simply looked at her with the same quality of direct and unhurried attention he had brought to the parking garage, and after a moment, he gave a slight nod, the nod of someone who recognized her, and was content to have that recognized registered between them without requiring anything more of it. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator bank, pressed the button, and waited. Maya stood with her coffee cup and watched him step into the elevator and the doors close, and she remained standing there for a moment after they had closed, her pulse doing something complicated that she told herself was the extra shot of espresso. She went back upstairs. She did not tell anyone. What would she have said? A man from the parking garage last night was in the lobby this morning. He nodded at me. He was wearing a dark coat, and he stood the way people stood in movies right before they said something that changed the whole story. She did not have the language for what she had registered in him, the quality of his presence that was not threatening but was undeniably powerful, like standing near something that generated its own weather. She sat at her desk and drank her coffee and returned to work, and she did not think about him again for the rest of the afternoon. This was not entirely true. Dante had business on the fourth floor, a lease renegotiation that Sal had arranged through the appropriate property management channels, and that required his signature on 2 documents and 14 minutes of his time. The lobby had been incidental. Seeing her had been, if he was being precise with himself, not entirely incidental. He had known she worked in this building. He had known which floor. He had not known that she went to the lobby cart for coffee at 12:15, but he had arrived at 12:10 for the fourth floor meeting, and the lobby was a small space. And what had happened was what sometimes happened when the geography of a city and the movements of 2 particular people intersected. He noted that she looked different in the daytime, competent and pressed and composed in the way that people who had difficult mornings sometimes became during the workday, not because the difficult morning had resolved, but because they had made a decision about what to show. She had covered the bruise well. He could see it only because he knew it was there, a slight unevenness in the tone of her left cheek that had nothing to do with light or shadow. He completed his business on the fourth floor and returned to his car and called Sal from the parking structure a different level today, the third, and said, "The Labor Department complaint. Move it forward." How? However, it needs to be moved. The attorney who slow-walked it offer him something he values more than Webb's retainer. That's not subtle. It doesn't need to be subtle. It needs to be quiet. Dante considered. Does Webb know about the complaint? His attorneys do. He has to, through them. Then he knows she filed it, and he knows it stalled. Which means, he believes there's no consequence. Sal said nothing because this was not a question. Make there be a consequence, Dante said. Just not one that points anywhere. A procedural acceleration. An investigator reassignment. Something that moves it forward without advertising who moved it. You're not going to make this about you personally. Not yet. He drove out of the parking structure onto Meridian Street and turned toward his afternoon, and he did not look up at the building as he passed. But he thought about the look on Maya Santos's face when she had recognized him in the lobby the split second before her composure had snapped back into place, when something unguarded had moved across her features. Not fear, not welcome, but the particular expression of someone who had not expected to be seen and was not certain yet whether being seen was good or bad, and was taking the time, carefully, to decide. He found that he was thinking about the decision she was making, even though it was none of his business, even though he had no claim to an interest in its outcome. He thought about it for longer than was strictly practical. On Friday afternoon, 2 days after the parking garage, Marcus called Maya into his office at 4:30 and told her he needed her to stay late to prepare briefing books for a board presentation the following Tuesday. This meant compiling research across 6 project files, producing summaries to his specific format requirements, and binding the materials in the particular order he preferred, a task that would conservatively take 5 hours, and that he delivered as a Friday afternoon addendum as though it were a minor administrative matter. Maya did the math silently while he talked. She would need to call Mrs. Petrova. She would need to cover the additional hours. Lily had a scheduled video call with Carlos's mother, her grandmother, on Friday evenings. A ritual Lily looked forward to enough that missing it would require an explanation Maya did not yet have. "I need them by Monday morning," Marcus said. He was looking at his phone while he said it. "I'll have them ready," she said. He waved his hand in the gesture that dismissed her. She went back to her desk and called Mrs. Petrova, Who could stay? And texted Carlos's mother to push the call to Saturday morning and pulled up the first of the 6 project files and began. The office emptied around her over the next 2 hours, the junior analysts at 5:30, the project managers by 6, the last of the support staff by 6:45. By 7, the floor was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system and the sound of Maya's keyboard and the distant ping of the elevator. At 7:20, the elevator pinged and the doors opened, and Marcus Webb came back. He had changed his jacket. He smelled of the particular combination of scotch and cold air that had become, over 14 months, a sensory signal her nervous system had learned to catalog. He walked through the empty office and stopped at her desk. "How much is done?" he asked. 3 files, almost finished with the 4th, she said, keeping her eyes on the screen. "You should be further along." "I started at 4:30, she said, and the precision of her tone was the closest she came to protest. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked past her desk toward the window, the particular walk of a man in a mood that was not yet identifiable, and Maya tracked him in her peripheral vision while keeping her face pointed at the screen. "That complaint you filed," Marcus said. She stopped typing. "The Labor Department one." He said it with the particular casual delivery of someone who wanted her to understand that he had always known and had simply not chosen to mention it until now. "Do you know what that costs me? Not financially. In time. In having to explain to my attorneys why my assistant is making frivolous accusations to a government agency. I filed a report about a hostile work environment," Maya said. She was proud, after that her voice did not shake. "That's not frivolous. I built this company for 20 years. He turned from the window. "I have relationships in this city that you cannot begin to understand. The people who sit on those oversight boards have dinner with me. I make calls, Maya. I make them and things move. That complaint went nowhere because I made a call, and if you file another one, the same thing will happen." He walked toward her desk. "And then I'll need to find someone who doesn't waste my time with theatrics." She looked up at him then. It was a decision to meet his eyes rather than look away, and the decision cost her something, but she made it. "Are you threatening to fire me for filing a legal complaint?" "I'm telling you how the world works." He was close to her desk now, close enough that she could see the slight looseness around his eyes that the scotch produced, and her hand had moved without her instruction to rest near the edge of the desk in the posture of someone prepared to stand up quickly if standing up became necessary. She did not know if she was afraid or furious. Perhaps both. Perhaps the line between them was narrower than she had previously understood. "It would be a shame," Marcus said, "if Lily's school found out that her mother was the kind of person who makes false accusations about her employer. Children pick up on that kind of thing. The stigma." The mention of Lily's name stopped something in Maya's chest. He had never used Lily's name before. He had known it appeared in her HR file, on the emergency contact forms, but its deployment now, in this register, was deliberate and specific and designed to land exactly where it had landed, which was in the place where Maya kept everything that mattered. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her screen. "I'll have the books ready by Monday morning," she said. Her voice was very quiet. He stood there for another few seconds, and she could feel the weight of him deciding whether he needed to say anything else, whether the point had been sufficiently made. Apparently it had, because he walked to his office and the door closed. Maya sat at her desk in the empty office and did not move for 60 seconds. Then she opened a new browser tab and navigated to a legal aid website she had bookmarked months ago and never used, and read the page about employment law consultations with the focused attention of someone who has decided that something is going to change. Across the city, at that same moment, Dante Caruso was sitting in a restaurant. He owned a small Italian place in the Garrison district that existed primarily as a place where he could eat without being observed when his phone buzzed with a message from Sal. It read, "The investigator assigned to Santos versus Webb Development just got a promotion that moved her to a different department. The case is being reassigned. Estimated processing restart, 10 business days." Dante read it and set down his fork. He typed back, "Good." Then, after a moment, he typed, "What's Webb doing tonight?" The response came in 2 minutes. "At the Meridian Tower offices. After hours." "She's still there too," the assistant. Dante was very still for a moment. Then he stood and put on his coat. He did not tell himself he had a reason. He simply drove. When he entered the lobby of Meridian Tower at 7:42, The security guard at the front desk looked up with the alertness of someone recognizing a face they had been quietly instructed to recognize and allow through without documentation. Dante had had that conversation with the building's security contractor 3 days ago through the appropriate management channels, as was appropriate for a building owner. He took the elevator to 11. The floor was empty and lit only by the overhead fluorescents that stayed on automatically. He could see, from the elevator bank, the only occupied desk near the far window, a woman bent over a monitor, her dark hair catching the cold office light, the faint sound of keyboard strokes carrying across the vacant space. He stood for a moment at the elevator bank and watched her work. She had not heard him arrive. She was focused entirely on the screen, her posture the particular posture of someone in the deep end of a task. And there was something about the sight of her alone in this empty office at this hour, something about the context of what Sal had just told him, about Marcus Webb in his office somewhere behind that closed door that settled in Dante's chest and did not lift. He was about to cross toward her when his phone vibrated. He looked at it. Sal again. A single line. Webb left through the back entrance while you were driving. He's gone. Dante exhaled slowly. He looked at Maya Santos, still bent over her work, alone in the quiet of the empty office, entirely unaware that the man who had decided to address her situation was standing 30 feet away, watching her breathe. He did not cross toward her desk. It was not the right moment she was working. She was composed, and appearing now would require explanations he was not yet prepared to give. There were things that needed to be in place before he spoke to her again. Things that needed to already be true rather than promised. He pressed the elevator button and waited. When the doors opened, he stepped in. He turned so that for the last moment before the doors closed, he could still see her, the dark hair, the desk lamp, the focused tilt of her head. Then the doors shut. Maya looked up from her screen at 8:55, and for a moment she had the strange sensation of a room that had held something and then released it, not a sound or a presence she could identify, but a quality of the air that felt slightly altered, the way a space sometimes felt after a window had been briefly opened and then closed again. She looked toward the elevator bank. Empty. She returned to her work. She finished the last briefing book at 9:47. She printed, collated, bound, and stacked 6 identical packets on Marcus's desk in the precise order he had specified. Then she turned off the desk lamp and gathered her bag and took the elevator down and walked out through the lobby where Pete's coffee cart stood empty and covered for the night. She stepped out onto Meridian Street. The night was cold. Her cheek, under the concealer, still ached faintly at the bone. She had 2 missed calls from Mrs. Petrova and a photo from Lily, a drawing done in crayon of what appeared to be a horse or possibly a very large dog, with a caption Mrs. Petrova had transcribed, "This is for you, Mama. I made it during dinner." Maya stood on the sidewalk outside the building and looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then she looked up at the street, at the ordinary city in its ordinary nighttime motion, at the cars moving on Meridian, at the lights in the windows of buildings that held the lives of other people at their various distances, and she made a decision. She did not know yet exactly what the decision was. It was not fully formed, not a plan with steps and a timeline and a clear outcome. It was something more fundamental than that. It was the decision that comes to people after they have absorbed one thing too many, not a dramatic breaking point, not a collapse, but a quiet and specific refusal to continue in the same direction. The kind of decision that does not announce itself, but simply settles into the bones and changes the way a person stands. She squared her shoulders. She walked to her car. She did not know that somewhere in the city, a man she had met twice and could not fully account for had pulled a favor that was already beginning to move the stalled machinery of an employment complaint in her direction. She did not know that he had driven to her building tonight, had stood in the quiet of the 11th floor and watched her work, and had made his own quiet decision in the dark. She did not know any of that yet, but she had felt something in the lobby with the coffee, in the parking garage before that, something in the quality of being seen by someone who did not want anything from the seeing except to confirm that she was all right. She had not known what to do with it then. She still did not know entirely, but she remembered it. And she was the kind of woman who kept the things she remembered, the way you kept a coin you'd found on a difficult day, not because it was worth anything in particular, but because the finding of it had happened at exactly the right moment, and that timing felt like it meant something. She drove home through the quiet streets. Lily was asleep when she got there, Edmund the rabbit tucked under her arm, the crescent moon night light doing its patient work in the hallway. Maya sat on the edge of her daughter's bed in the dark and listened to her breathe and thought about what happened next. She did not yet know the full shape of what was coming, the intervention that was already beginning to move on her behalf through channels she had no knowledge of. The man who was reading a file on his desk and had already decided, in the particular way that certain men decided things, that what had happened in the parking garage on Meridian Street was not finished and would not be finished until its author had been properly acquainted with consequence. She did not know that in 3 days, Marcus Webb would receive a communication that would make him understand, for the first time, that someone in this city was paying attention to him in a way he had never anticipated and could not yet identify. She did not know any of it, but she was still here. She had taken the blow and gotten up off the floor and driven to her daughter and done her work and made her decision, and she was still here, and that though she would not have called it strength in the moment, because strength was too large and too confident a word for what she had left, was the thing that made her impossible to ignore. For the man who had already decided to pay attention, it was more than enough. It was everything. Monday came in gray and cold, the kind of morning that settled over the city like a held breath. Maya dropped Lily at the kindergarten gate at 7:53, kissed the top of her head, watched her run toward the climbing structure in the yard without looking back, and then sat in her car for 4 minutes before driving to Meridian Tower, because 4 minutes was the precise amount of time she had calculated that she could afford to simply sit. She had spent the weekend doing what she always did when the weight of her situation became too concentrated. She had moved through the motions of ordinary life with enough deliberateness that the motions themselves became a kind of anchor. She had taken Lily to the farmer's market on Saturday morning and let her choose the most impractical vegetables she could find, which turned out to be 3 different colors of radish and a bunch of Swiss chard, so large it had to be carried under Lily's arm like a sheaf of wheat. They had made soup on Sunday afternoon, a process that involved Lily standing on a stool and stirring with a wooden spoon and narrating each addition in the voice she used for imaginary games, high and certain and full of invented authority. Maya had watched her daughter and felt, as she did in these moments, the particular mixture of love and terror that was the essential condition of being someone's parent, the terror that the world was exactly as indifferent as it sometimes proved itself to be, and the love that insisted you go on regardless. She had not allowed herself to think about Marcus Webb's voice when he said Lily's name. She had not allowed herself to think about the man from the parking garage. She allowed herself 4 minutes to think about neither of these things simultaneously, and then she drove to work. The 11th floor was its usual configuration of controlled motion when she arrived. She sat at her desk, opened her calendar, and had been working for perhaps 40 minutes when Marcus's office door opened, and he appeared in the frame with the particular compressed energy of a man whose day had already gone wrong before anyone else had arrived. He did not look at Maya. He walked to the window, looked at the street below, walked back, and then went into his office and closed the door. Hard. Not a slam, he was too controlled for slams, but with the emphatic precision of a man communicating something. Maya returned to her screen and noted, in the part of her mind that had become very good at atmospheric reading, that whatever had produced this morning's mood was not her. Not yet. She filed that information and continued working. At 11 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID read, City of Meridian, Department of Labor, Workforce Compliance. She looked at it for one full ring before answering. Maya Santos. The voice on the other end was brisk, professional, the voice of a government office that had more calls than ours. This is Angela Reyes from the Department of Labor, Workforce Compliance Division. I'm calling about the complaint you filed in September regarding web development. Case number 714-B. I'm the new investigator assigned to your case. I wanted to let you know that the file has been reviewed. Your complaint has been assessed as sufficient to proceed, and we'll be scheduling a formal intake interview in the next 10 business days. Maya's hand tightened on the phone. I'm sorry, she said carefully. I was under the impression the case had been. I was told it was pending review for an indefinite period. It was reassigned last week as part of a departmental reallocation, Angela said, with the tone of someone reciting an administrative explanation without particular interest in its accuracy. We're moving forward. Is there a time that works for you for an initial interview? Maya wrote down the date Angela offered and repeated it back and confirmed and thanked her and ended the call. Then she sat very still at her desk for a moment. She did not know what had changed. She had not done anything differently. She had not called the department or retained an attorney. She had looked at that legal aid website on Friday night, but had not yet followed through. As far as she could account for, nothing in the equation of her situation had been altered by her own action. Cases got reassigned. Departments got reorganized. Perhaps it had been nothing more than administrative coincidence. She noted that she did not quite believe this, and moved on. Marcus called her into his office at 2:15. He was behind his desk when she entered, the posture of a man establishing territory, and he did not ask her to sit. He looked at her for a moment with the particular look he had developed in the past week, not the hot-tempered fury that produced slaps and thrown objects, but something colder and more considered, the look of a man who had decided that a different instrument was required. "The Callaway Project," he said. "The summary you sent this morning. The comps section uses last quarter's figures." "The current quarter figures haven't been released yet," Maya said. "The Callaway team specifically asked for the most recent available, which is last quarter. That's not what I need for the board. I can update them the moment the new figures are published. That's on Wednesday. I need it today. The figures don't exist yet today." He held her gaze. She held his. The silence between them had a temperature. "I'll need a revised version by end of day," he said, "using current figures. I can have it to you Wednesday afternoon as soon as the data releases." "End of day today, Maya." His voice was perfectly even. "That's what I said." She understood what this was. This was what the Friday night conversation had looked like from the outside, the invisible architecture of a man engineering documentation of inadequacy. By asking for something she could not deliver by the stated deadline, he was constructing a paper record of her failure. She could see it being built in real time. "I'll have it to you Wednesday when the data exists," she said, and went back to her desk. She heard, through the closed door, the sound of his desk phone being lifted. She did not know who he was calling. She began composing, in her head, a documentation of her own, the exact exchange, the time, the specific request, the specific impossibility of meeting it. She had learned, from the legal aid website, that documentation was the foundational currency of any employment case. She wrote it in an email, addressed it to herself, and sent it at 2:22. Then she opened a new file and began working on the Callaway summary with Wednesday's data block held as a placeholder, and she did not allow herself to feel anything about the exchange for the remainder of the afternoon. At 12:15 on Tuesday, she went downstairs for coffee. She had thought about not going, had considered that the lobby had a second option, a vending machine near the rear entrance, that she could use to avoid the particular exposure of the main lobby, the particular awareness she had developed of that space since Friday. Then she had decided that not going was its own form of concession to the anxiety she was trying not to have, and she had gone. Pete handed her the cup with an extra shot and said it was cold enough to freeze the ambition out of a city council member, which was his standard genre of commentary, and Maya smiled at him and turned and nearly walked into the man standing directly behind her. She stepped back. Dante Caruso stood at the coffee cart with his hands in his coat pockets and an expression of unremarkable patience, as though he had been standing in a lobby on a Tuesday afternoon waiting for nothing more significant than a cup of coffee, which was entirely possibly true and entirely possibly not. "Sorry," Maya said, the reflex before she had registered who it was. Then she registered who it was and said nothing further. He looked at her for a moment. At her face, where the bruise had faded to a faint yellowish shadow that the concealer handled easily now. At her composure, which he appeared to read with a precision she found unsettling. "How are you?" he said. "Fine." The reflex again. He gave her a slight look, the same one he had given her in the parking garage when she had said it the first time. The look that said the word was a habit, not an answer. She exhaled very quietly. "Better than last week," she said. Which was true. "Good." Pete handed him a black coffee, and he took it without looking away from her. He had a quality of attention that she had been trying to name since the parking garage and had not managed. It was not aggressive, not consuming, not the kind of attention that made a woman feel catalogued. It was simply present, the way that certain people were present, fully occupying the space they stood in rather than being partially elsewhere. It was, she had realized on Sunday while cutting radishes, an extremely rare quality. "You work in this building," she said. It was a fact, not a question. She had seen him going to the elevator on Friday, had watched him press the button with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Sometimes. What floor? He considered this for a brief moment. Various ones. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them was performing anything. Who are you? She asked. Dante, he said. Just the first name. Delivered without elaboration. Dante, she repeated. And you're in this building for what? You haven't said. Business. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. She studied him. She had years of practice at reading the people around her. It was a survival skill, refined over 14 months of working for Marcus Webb, but also refined over years before that of navigating a marriage that had required the constant reading of another person's weather. She was good at detecting performance, at identifying the gap between what people said and what they meant. She could not find that gap in this man. Not because he was an open book, he wasn't, not even slightly, but because he seemed to have made a decision not to perform anything. What he offered was simply what he was. It was disorienting, actually. You've been in this building 3 times that I know of in the past week, she said. And all 3 times, you've been somewhere I was. The building has 16 floors, he said. 53 tenants. The overlap is statistically unremarkable. Is it? He said nothing. He drank his coffee and looked at her with the patient quality of someone who was willing to let a silence exist without filling it. Are you watching me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, not in the way you mean. What way do I mean? The way that would be concerning. She held his gaze. Her pulse was doing something that she would not describe as fear and was not entirely comfortable calling anything else. Then what way? She asked. The way of someone who saw something he couldn't ignore and hasn't yet decided what to do about it. The honesty of it was so unexpected that she didn't speak for a moment. People who wanted something from you rarely described their interest with that kind of bare accuracy. They dressed it, managed it, made it sound incidental or altruistic or structural. They did not say, I saw something and I haven't decided. I don't need anything from you, she said. I know. Whatever you think you saw, I know what I saw. The directness of it stopped her. She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the lobby continued its Tuesday noon motion, people crossing from elevator to exit, conversations in passing, the sound of heels on marble. None of it touched the small space of the coffee cart where they stood. I filed a complaint, she said, with the Labor Department. 8 weeks ago. I was told it had been stalled, basically indefinitely. Yesterday morning I got a call saying it had been reassigned and they were moving forward. She watched his face carefully. Do you know anything about that? He met her eyes without deflecting. I know that government departments occasionally reallocate cases, he said. That's not what I asked. No, he said. It isn't. Another silence. And in that silence, Maya Santos arrived at a conclusion that would have seemed impossible to her in any previous version of her life and felt, somehow, not impossible at all. She looked at this man who had appeared from the dark end of a parking garage with his hands steady and his voice quiet and his attention complete, and she said, quietly, Who are you, Dante? Not a question this time. He held her gaze. Someone who noticed, he said, what you've been enduring, and decided it required addressing. The words settled over her in a way that she had not prepared for. Not because they were elaborate or declarative or dressed in the language of rescue, they were none of those things. But because they were accurate, and being accurately seen, after months of carefully not being seen, was its own form of impact. She looked down at her coffee cup. I don't know what to do with that, she said honestly. You don't have to do anything with it. You can't just, she stopped, searching for the words. You can't just decide to address my situation. I'm not a situation. I know what you are, he said. And the steadiness of it not reassuring, not soothing, just certain produced in Maya a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time and could not quite identify in the moment, though she would understand later, lying awake in her apartment with the crescent moon night light doing its quiet work in the hallway, that what she had felt was the feeling of being seen accurately by someone who was not afraid of what they saw. She should have said more, should have pushed for answers, for the name behind the first name, for the nature of the business that brought him to various floors of a 16-story building on multiple days in a week. Instead, she said, I have to get back upstairs. I know. She turned toward the elevator. Maya, her name in his mouth was neither a command nor a question. It was simply her name, pronounced with the full weight of the person who belonged to it. She turned back. "If something happens," he said, "I want you to have a way to reach me." He handed her a card. Not a business card, no company name, no title, no elaboration. Just a phone number, handwritten on a plain white card, in the clean, deliberate script of someone who had written it specifically for her. She took it. She took the elevator upstairs and sat at her desk and slid the card into the inner pocket of her wallet, behind the emergency 20 she kept there, and returned to the Callaway summary as though nothing had occurred, and did not take the card out again for the rest of the day. But she was aware of it the way you were aware of something that had settled into the specific gravity of your life and did not intend to leave. Dante sat in his car in the Meridian Tower garage on Tuesday afternoon and made 3 calls. The first was to Sal. Everything you can find on Marcus Webb's financial structure. Not the company, the man. Personal accounts, liabilities, the things he's leveraged and the things he's borrowed against. The shell companies he uses that aren't listed in the corporate filings. The second was to an attorney named Gregory Park, who practiced employment law independently of any firm large enough to be pressured by Webb Development's legal team. "I'm going to have someone call you," Dante said. "Maya Santos. I need you to take her case pro bono, and I need you to be willing to move aggressively." Gregory Park had known Dante Caruso for 8 years and asked only, "What's the case?" "Hostile work environment with physical escalation. The employer is politically connected and has already interfered with a government complaint once. I need someone who doesn't flinch at political connection." "Send me the file when she calls," Gregory said. "I'll handle it." The third call was to no one. Dante sat with the phone in his hand and looked through the windshield at the concrete of the parking structure and thought about the way Maya Santos had said, "I don't know what to do with that." Not with the helplessness of a woman waiting to be told, but with the particular honesty of someone who had spent a long time managing her own situation and was recalibrating the calculation now that a new variable had entered it. She was not passive. He had known that from the parking garage floor, the way she had bent to pick up the papers, the way she had done it without any performance of victimhood, with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that the papers needed gathering and was gathering them. There was a quality in her of endurance that was not resignation, endurance with direction, endurance with a destination it had not yet reached. He had known women who survived things. He had grown up around them. His mother had been a woman who had stayed in proximity to a dangerous man far longer than was safe, and who had developed, over those years, the same compressed competence Maya carried, the same practiced composure that people who absorbed a great deal learned to wear as their primary face. His mother had gotten out eventually. It had taken a long time, and it had cost her enormously. Dante had been 14 when she had finally left, and he had carried the fact of the cost, the years, the specific damage as one of the foundational facts of his understanding of the world. He did not tell himself this was about his mother. He was too honest with himself for that particular self-deception. But he did not pretend the recognition was coincidental either. Maya Santos was not his mother, and her situation was not his to resolve unilaterally, and he was aware that the line between protection and control was one that certain men blurred with the most genuine of intentions. He had thought about this carefully. He had thought about it in the particular way he thought about things that required precision, not emotionally, but structurally, asking what outcome he was working toward and what methods were consistent with it. The outcome he was working toward was this: that Maya Santos would be safe, that Marcus Webb would face consequences, and that both of these things would happen in a way that left Maya with more agency than she'd had before, not less. He was not interested in replacing one form of someone else's control with his own. He was interested in removing the obstacle. That was, he was aware, easier to intend than to execute. He started the car and drove north. On Wednesday morning, the Callaway data released at 9. Maya had the updated summary in Marcus's inbox by 10:15. He did not acknowledge it. By end of day Wednesday, she had received 2 written notices, one regarding the summary's theoretical lateness, dated to Tuesday, which she noted had been prepared before Wednesday's data existed, and one regarding an email she had sent 3 weeks ago that Marcus was now characterizing as a failure to copy a required party on a correspondence. She photographed both notices with her phone and emailed them to herself. She printed copies and filed them in the folder she had created, which now contained 6 documented incidents with times, dates, and her account of each. She called Gregory Park's office on Wednesday afternoon Having received his name via an email from Angela Reyes at the Labor Department, a referral, Angela had said, part of the department's new initiative connecting complainants with employment law resources. Maya had not questioned the mechanics of this. She had called the number. Gregory Park was direct, organized, and asked exactly the right questions in exactly the right order. By the end of the 30-minute call, he had agreed to take her case and had outlined, in terms she could understand, what the process would involve and what protections she had as someone who had filed a formal complaint. Protections, he explained, that made retaliatory discipline legally actionable. What you're describing in these recent notices, Gregory said, is textbook retaliation. We're going to document everything from this point forward, and I'm going to send a letter to Webb Development's counsel this week putting them on notice that you're represented and that any further disciplinary action will be reviewed under the retaliation framework. That will slow him down. And if it doesn't, then we go to court and we win, Gregory said, with the specific calm of someone who had done this before and knew what it cost and knew it was worth it. Maya hung up and sat at her desk and felt, for the first time in 14 months, that the weight she had been carrying had shifted slightly, not removed, not even substantially lightened, but redistributed in a way that made it possible to stand differently. Under it, she thought about Dante, about the card in her wallet. She did not call him. She was not yet sure what she would say. Marcus received Gregory Park's letter on Thursday. Maya knew this because she was the one who sorted his mail, and the envelope from Park, Torres, and Associates landed on his desk at 10:15 while he was in a meeting. She noted the return address without touching the envelope. When Marcus returned at 11 and went through his mail, she heard through the door not words, just the particular quality of silence that followed the opening of certain envelopes, the silence of a man reading something that altered his morning. He called her in at 11:30. He was sitting behind his desk with the letter in his hand and an expression she had not seen before. Not the hot fury, not the cold calculation. Something in between, the controlled surface of a man managing the feeling of being outmaneuvered. You retained an attorney, he said. I have legal representation, yes. For what? For the complaint I filed in September. She held his gaze. And for any retaliation related to that complaint. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him running the calculation, what he could do, what it would cost, what the attorney's letter meant for his options. She could see him understanding that the game had changed in its rules without changing in its stakes. You can go, he said. She went. The rest of Thursday was quiet in the particular way that the eye of a system is quiet, not peaceful, but stilled, all the energy gathered in preparation for what came next. Maya worked efficiently and without interaction beyond what was required, and left at 5:15 and picked up Lily at the aftercare program, and went home and made dinner and gave Lily a bath and read her 3 chapters of a book about a girl who found a dragon in her grandmother's attic and tucked her in with Edmund the rabbit and sat in the kitchen after with a cup of tea and allowed herself, for 20 minutes, to feel the full weight of the week. It was heavy. She felt it in her shoulders, in the specific ache behind her left eye that had been present since Monday, in the way that her hands, when she set down the cup, were not entirely steady. She had been running on the careful management of anxiety for long enough that the anxiety had become structural part of the load-bearing system of how she moved through the day, and she was tired in a way that sleep did not entirely reach. She took out her wallet. She looked at the card for a long moment. The handwritten number, the plain white paper. She did not call, but she turned the card over in her fingers several times before putting it back, and that was its own kind of decision. On Saturday morning, Maya took Lily to the park 4 blocks from their apartment. This was their standard Saturday ritual. Weather permitting, Lily ran. Maya sat on the bench near the climbing structure with coffee from the corner place and watched. And for 2 hours the world contracted to this small, manageable radius of swings and sandbox, and her daughter's voice calling her name at intervals to confirm she was still watching. Lily had found a stick she considered significant and was using it to draw shapes in the sandbox while narrating the process to an audience that appeared to be entirely imaginary. The shapes were elaborate. The narration was continuous. Maya watched her with the specific pleasure of a parent who has found a moment of genuine stillness in a week that had not contained many of them. She was refilling the lid of her coffee cup when she became aware of a presence at the far end of the bench. She looked up. Dante Caruso was sitting at the other end of the park bench with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup of his own, looking out at the park with the unhurried quality of a man who had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. He was not looking at her. He was watching Lily in the sandbox with the particular expression of an adult watching a child, not fond, exactly, but attentive in the way that certain people were attentive to small children, which was to say, genuinely. Maya stared at him. He turned. "I'm not following you," he said, before she could speak. "I live 3 blocks north of here. I walk through this park on Saturday mornings." She held his gaze. He looked back without any of the performance of coincidence. She noted that she believed him, and noted further that she was not certain whether this belief was wisdom or a failure of appropriate suspicion. "That's my daughter," she said. "I know." Lily looked up from her sandbox at that moment with the unerring instinct of small children for the attention of nearby adults, and fixed Dante with the direct and unabashed assessment that 5-year-olds applied to strangers, the assessment that asked simply, "Are you interesting? And if so, in what way?" "Hi," Lily said. "Hello," Dante said. "I'm making a city," Lily said. "That part is the harbor." She indicated a specific portion of the sandbox that was, to the adult eye, indistinguishable from the rest of it, but that Lily regarded with the proprietorial certainty of an urban planner who knew exactly where the harbor was. "Do you know what a harbor is?" "I do," Dante said. "It's where boats go," Lily said, delivering this information with the satisfaction of someone who had recently acquired it and intended to deploy it frequently. "That's right." Lily looked at him for another moment with that complete and guileless appraisal. "You have a serious face," she said. Maya pressed her lips together. Dante looked at the child for a moment, and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, nothing that would have been legible to anyone at any distance. But Maya was close enough to see it. A slight softening at the corners of his eyes. The movement of a man who had been hit by something small and precise, and was absorbing it with more care than the impact seemed to warrant. "I've been told that," he said. "My mama has a serious face sometimes," Lily said. "But then she laughs, and it goes away." She delivered this analysis and returned to the harbor with the completeness of a person who had said what they had to say and moved on. Maya looked at Dante. He was looking at her. "She's right," he said quietly. "About what?" "Both things." Maya felt something happen in her chest that she was not prepared for and did not have the right vocabulary for. It was not romantic. Not yet. Not in any clean or nameable way. It was something prior to romance, something about being seen, not just accurately but kindly, which was different from accurately in a way she had forgotten was possible. She looked at her coffee cup. "The attorney," she said, because it was safer. "Gregory Park. He called me on Wednesday. He said he got my name from the Labor Department referral program." She paused. "That's not a thing that exists, is it?" "A beat. I don't know what programs the Labor Department runs," Dante said. "Dante." He looked at her. The steadiness. Again, the refusal to perform innocence. "Are you safe?" he asked. Just that. Bypassing everything she had been about to say and arriving at the thing that mattered. She considered the question honestly. "More than I was last week," she said. "My attorney sent a letter. Marcus received it Thursday. He was different yesterday. Not better exactly, but more contained." "Good. It won't hold forever. He's not the kind of person who accepts limits placed by other people." "No," Dante said. "He isn't." She looked at him sharply. "You know him." "I know the type." "That's not what you said." He was quiet for a moment. "He has the building on 11 through his company. That means he falls within a set of things I pay attention to." "You're connected to the building." He said nothing, which was answer enough. Maya processed this. The building that housed his office, a building she had worked in for 14 months, was connected to the man sitting beside her on this park bench. She thought about the security cameras on level 2 of the parking structure, the cameras that had been there, she now understood, for a reason. She thought about the footage of the slap in the garage, which existed somewhere, which Dante may or may not have seen. "Did you see it happen?" she asked. "On the camera footage. Did you watch it?" "Yes." The single word, and the complete absence of effect in its delivery, not cold, but precise, told her everything about what it had cost him to watch it and what it had decided in him. She looked out at Lily, who had expanded the city now to include what she described as a mountain range, and was using the stick to indicate elevation changes with architectural seriousness. "I don't want to be someone's project," Maya said. "I don't want to be the woman someone decided to rescue. I've spent 3 years being the thing that belonged to someone else, and I'm not doing that again." I know. He said it without deflection. Do you? The complaint, the attorney, those are tools. Yours to use or not use. I didn't intervene in Marcus Webb's office. I didn't contact your employer or threaten his business or do anything that affects your position directly. I addressed the obstruction of a legal process you had already initiated. He paused. That distinction matters to me. She looked at him for a long moment. It was the longest she had looked directly at him. Long enough that she began to read the things that were not on the surface, the particular quality of his stillness that was, she now understood, not absence of feeling but the management of it. The way that certain people learn to carry large things internally rather than wearing them on their faces. There was something beneath his composure that she recognized because she had the same thing, a depth of experience that had required the development of controls, the kind of controls that became so habitual they were almost indistinguishable from the personality itself. Who are you, Dante? She asked for the second time. He considered her for a moment. Then, someone who has spent a long time in this city, who has built things that are complicated to explain and that I would not ask you to approve of, who saw what happened to you and could not make myself be neutral about it. He held her gaze. That's the honest version. She absorbed this. Complicated to explain, she repeated. Yes. That's a way of saying something I wouldn't want to know the details of. It's a way of saying, he said carefully, that there are parts of my life that exist at a remove from yours, and that I have no interest in closing that distance. The remove is intentional. She looked at him. You're not going to tell me more than that. Not today. A pause. But I won't lie to you. If you ask me something directly, I'll tell you the truth, or I'll tell you I can't answer, and you'll know from the latter what the territory is. Maya thought about this. It was the most unusual offer she had ever received, and it was strange enough to be credible. No one performing innocence offered a map of their own silences. Lily came running from the sandbox. She skidded to a stop in front of Dante with her stick held up for inspection. This is my map stick, she announced. I use it for mapping. Dante looked at the stick with the gravity it required. It's a good one, he said. Lily looked pleased. She turned to Maya. Mama, can we get the bagels now? You said bagels. In a few minutes, baby. Lily assessed Dante once more. Do you like bagels? She asked. Very much. Lily nodded with the satisfaction of a judgment confirmed and went back to the sandbox. Maya watched her go. When she looked back at Dante, he was watching Lily with that expression again, the slight movement around his eyes, the absorbed quality of someone who had been reached by something small and was not certain what to do with that. She's something, he said. She's everything, Maya said. He turned to look at her, and she looked back. And for a moment, there was nothing performed between them, no management, no presentation, no version of either of them that was adjusted for an audience. Just two people sitting on a park bench in the particular late morning light of a cold Saturday, aware of something that neither of them had planned for and both of them were going to have to think about for a long time. I should take her for bagels, Maya said. Of course. She stood. He stood. They stood for a moment on the path, and she thought about what to say and found, unusually, that she had nothing to perform and nothing to manage and could simply say the thing that was true. Thank you, she said. For the attorney. For whatever you did at the Labor Department. For the parking garage. She met his eyes. I want you to know that I see it. I'm not pretending I don't. I know you see it, he said. That's enough. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she called Lily's name, and her daughter came running with the stick, and they walked toward the bagel place, and Maya did not look back. But she was aware of him standing on the path and of the particular weight of being watched by someone who was not watching for anything except to confirm she was still all right. It was, she thought, the strangest and most specific form of comfort she had encountered. If you are as deep into this story as I am right now, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. I upload new stories every week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. Your support is the reason I keep going. Now, back to them. Dante returned from the park and sat in his apartment for an hour. He did not review files, or make calls, or return to the operational currents of his day. He sat in the chair by the window and thought about a 5-year-old with a map stick and her mother's dark hair and the way she had looked at his face and simply said what she saw, without the layer of calculation that adults applied to the same observation. He thought about Maya saying she's everything and the way she had said it, not with sentiment, not with the register of a woman performing her devotion to her child, but with the flat and complete certainty of someone stating the organizing fact of their life. He had not expected this. He had made a decision in a parking garage about a woman he didn't know and had taken measured, careful action toward addressing her situation. And somewhere between the parking garage and the park bench, the situation had become a person in a way that surprised him with its speed and its specificity. He was not a man who surprised easily. He noted the surprise with the same attention he brought to everything else and tried to understand its source. What he arrived at, after an hour in the chair, was this. He had been expecting to find, in Maya Santos, a woman who needed protecting. What he had found was a woman who was already protecting herself, already fighting, who had filed a complaint and photographed notices and hired herself a lawyer, and was doing all of it with her jaw set and her child's drawings on the refrigerator and her neighbor covering the evenings. She was not waiting for rescue. She was in the middle of her own battle. He had simply put weapons she could use within her reach, and she had taken them. Without gratitude that eclipsed her own agency, without dependence, without the particular diminishment that some people experienced when someone helped them. She had taken what was offered and deployed it, and then looked at him in the park with clear eyes, and said, "I see it," as though she was not going to pretend either of them was something other than what they were. He found that he had no frame of reference for her. In his life, he had known two categories of people, those who were afraid of him and those who wanted something from him. Occasionally, the same person occupied both categories simultaneously. Maya Santos was afraid of nothing he had shown her, and she had been entirely explicit about not wanting to be a project or a rescue or a thing that belonged to someone. What she wanted, as far as he could read, was simply to be seen accurately and treated accordingly. It was the most straightforward request he had encountered in recent memory, and somehow the most difficult to fulfill, because it required him to be something he had not practiced, not powerful, not strategic, not the man who controlled outcomes, but simply present, which was its own kind of exposure. He picked up his phone and called Sal. Marcus Webb made calls yesterday afternoon, Sal said without preamble. After he received the attorney's letter, he called 2 contacts on city council and 1 at the DA's office. He's trying to figure out who is behind the legal acceleration. Dante was still. Does he have anything yet? Not on us. But he's pulling threads. He knows someone cleared the path for the labor complaint, and he knows the attorney who took her case doesn't normally take pro bono employment work. He hasn't connected it back to the building ownership yet, but he will if he keeps pulling. How long? Days. Maybe a week if we're careful. We need to be ahead of that, Dante said. What do you want to do? Dante thought about it. The careful approach, the layers, the distance, the maintenance of the remove between his world and Maya's had been the right strategy when the goal was simply to address a stalled complaint and provide legal resources. It was a different calculation now. If Marcus Webb traced the thread back to Dante, his first move would not be toward Dante directly. His first move would be to apply pressure to the most accessible point of leverage, and the most accessible point of leverage was Maya. Set up a meeting, Dante said. With Webb. Not through intermediaries. Direct. Sal was quiet for a moment. You want to approach him yourself. I want to have a conversation about the building. The building. He leases 11 through 13 from one of our holding companies. The lease is up in 8 months. I want to have a preliminary conversation about renewal terms. And the real conversation will happen during the same meeting. Dante stood and walked to the window. Set it for Monday. His office, his territory. Let him feel comfortable. And if he connects you to the labor complaint, then we'll have a different conversation than the one I planned. But it's better that the conversation happens in a room I've chosen, at a time I've chosen, than when he puts it together on his own and decides to do something about it without warning. You're going to warn him off her, Sal said. I'm going to make certain things clear, Dante said, in the way that things need to be made clear. On Sunday evening, Maya received a text from Marcus's personal number, not his office line, his personal cell, which he had given her in her first week for genuine work emergencies, and which he had never used for anything that was not a genuine work emergency. The text read, "Meeting tomorrow at 4. My office. Important." She stared at it. It was too late on a Sunday for a work meeting. It was unusual in its brevity and its lack of content. She photographed the text and sent it to Gregory Park with a message. Marcus requested a meeting tomorrow afternoon. Should I attend? Gregory called her back in 10 minutes. Attend, but bring documentation of everything and say as little as possible. Let him speak. If he makes any threat, explicit or implicit, I need to know about it immediately. Do not agree to anything. A pause. And Maya, you have protections now. He can't retaliate without there being record of it. Remember that. She went to bed and did not sleep well and was awake at 5:30 staring at the ceiling. Her phone, which she had left face up on the nightstand, showed no new messages. She thought about the card in her wallet. She thought about telling Dante about the Sunday text. She thought about whether telling him crossed some line she was trying to hold about managing her own situation, about not becoming dependent on someone she barely knew. Then she thought about Lily in the next room and the 5 months of written warnings Marcus Webb was building towards something she could see, but not yet name, and she reached for her phone. She typed, "Webb sent me an unusual text tonight asking for a meeting Monday at 4. I have my attorney aware. Thought you should know." She sent it before she could talk herself out of it. The response came in 4 minutes, which meant he had been awake. "I know about the meeting. He's looking for the source of the legal pressure. Don't tell him anything. You don't owe him explanations." She looked at this message for a long time. He knows about the meeting already, which meant he knew things about Marcus Webb's movements that he should not have been able to know, and he knew them in real time, on a Sunday evening, which meant he was watching Marcus Webb in a way that was not incidental or casual. She thought about. Complicated to explain. She thought about the things she had decided not to ask about directly. She typed, "Should I be afraid of Monday?" The response, "No. I'll be in the building." She set the phone down. She would ask him, eventually, the full question. The one about who he was, and what the building and the cameras and the real-time knowledge of Marcus Webb's personal communications meant about the nature of the world he occupied. She would ask it, and he would tell her the truth, or tell her he couldn't answer, and she would decide what to do with the territory of the silence. But not tonight. Tonight, she reached over and turned off the lamp. And in the dark she thought about a park bench and a serious face and a child who had said exactly what she saw without calculating the cost of saying it. And she let that thought carry her towards something that was, if not quite sleep, at least rest. Monday at 4 o'clock, Maya walked into Marcus Webb's office with her documentation folder and her attorney's voice in her memory and the knowledge, carried quietly in the back of her mind like a stone in a pocket, that somewhere in this building Dante Caruso was present. She did not know what floor he was on. She did not know what form his presence took. She carried the knowledge of it not as reliance, but as ballast, not something she was leaning on, but something that kept her weight distributed evenly in a room that was designed to make her feel it unevenly. Marcus was behind his desk. He was looking at her the way he had been looking at her since Thursday, with the cold calculation of a man who was working through something, and who had not yet arrived at the answer, but was getting closer. "Close the door," he said. She closed it and stood. She did not sit. She had made the decision not to sit, not to accept the arrangement of the room as he had arranged it, him elevated behind the desk, her in the lower chair across from him. She stood and held her folder and waited. "Someone has been making inquiries," Marcus said. "About my company. About my lease arrangements in this building. About certain personnel matters." He looked at her. "I want to know if you've been talking to someone you shouldn't be talking to." "I have legal representation," Maya said. "My attorney has communicated with your attorneys. That's the appropriate channel for any discussions related to my complaint." "I'm not talking about the complaint." He stood from behind his desk, and she held her position. "I'm talking about someone with connections in this city who has been pulling threads that lead back to me. And the only thread that connects me to anyone outside my normal professional sphere is you. I don't know what you're referring to. Don't you?" He moved around the desk. Not toward her, but not away from her either. Moving in the room the way he moved when he was working something out. "You came to this job with nothing. No connections, no resources, nobody in your corner. And now you've got a government complaint accelerating, an attorney I've never been able to pressure, and someone asking questions about my lease arrangements with a holding company I cannot immediately identify the ownership of." He stopped. He looked at her. "Who are you talking to?" he said. "My attorney," she said. "That's all." He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him deciding something, and she did not know what the decision was, and the not knowing was the most frightening part of standing in this room, had always been the most frightening part. "This ends badly for you," he said finally. "Whatever you think you've set in motion, whatever friends you think you've made, you're a single mother with a government salary and a lease on a 2-bedroom walk-up. I have been in this city for 20 years. I have relationships you cannot imagine. Whatever attorney you have, whatever government caseworker you've charmed, it will not be enough. It has never been enough. He held her gaze. People who come at me end up with nothing. Maya looked at him. She thought about Lily drawing a harbor in the sandbox with a stick she had chosen because it was exactly the right weight for mapping. She thought about the way her daughter had looked at Dante's serious face and simply said what she saw. She thought about what it meant to be a person who said true things without calculating whether saying them would cost something. I filed a complaint about a hostile work environment, she said, because I work in one. I retained an attorney because that is my legal right. If that causes inconvenience for you, then the appropriate response is to address the working conditions that caused the complaint, not to threaten me in your office on a Monday afternoon. She held his gaze. And I'm going to need you to understand that I'm documenting this conversation. She held up her phone. The voice memo app was running. She had started it when she sat down, and she had been holding it slightly inside the documentation folder where it was not visible, but the microphone was clear. Marcus stared at the phone. The silence in the room had a different quality now. She turned, opened the door, and walked out. She went to the bathroom at the end of the hall and stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, a trick she had learned from managing adrenaline. The cold water against the pulse points, and she breathed, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, until the shaking in her hands resolved. Then she dried her hands and walked back to her desk and texted Gregory Park the entire summary of the meeting in 3 precise paragraphs. And she texted Dante a single line. I'm all right. It's done. His response came in less than a minute. I know. You were extraordinary. She put the phone in her bag. She did not know how he knew, and she found that she had moved past the question of how into the territory of simply accepting that he was paying attention in ways she could not account for, that he was watching what happened to her in this building with the particular focus of someone who had decided that what happened to her mattered. She sat at her desk in the late afternoon light of the 11th floor and did not allow herself to feel extraordinary, because that was too large and too fragile a word for what she was. She had simply done what the situation required. She had stood in a room and told the truth and recorded it and walked out. But she thought about the way Dante had said it, extraordinary in that level. Unhurried tone that carried no performance, that offered things as facts rather than flattery. And she thought about the fact that he had been in the building, somewhere below her, while she was in that room. She did not know what came next. She did not know what Marcus Webb would do with the recording and the closed door of his office and the calculation he was visibly running. She did not know what Dante would do with whatever he knew, or how long the careful remove between his world and hers would hold against the pressure of Marcus Webb's investigation. She knew that things were moving. She could feel it in the quality of the air around her, the way you could feel weather changing before the weather became visible, not in a specific thing, but in everything at once. The atmospheric pressure of a situation that had been static for a long time and was no longer static. She gathered her things at 5 o'clock and took the elevator down and crossed the lobby and stopped at Pete's cart. He handed her the cup without being asked and said the afternoon light on Meridian Street today had made the whole block look like it was made of amber, which was the most beautiful thing she had heard anyone say in recent memory. She took the coffee and walked to her car. Somewhere in the building behind her, on a floor she did not know, a man was ending a meeting that had not been about lease renewals, a meeting in which things had been made clear in the way that certain things needed to be made clear, a meeting that Marcus Webb was going to spend the rest of the evening trying to understand the full dimensions of. That meeting had not been gentle. It had not been ambiguous. It had been, in the way that Dante Caruso operated, precise, quiet, and complete. And Marcus Webb, sitting in his office after the door had closed, was just beginning to understand that the city he had operated in for 20 years was not the same city he had walked through this morning. Something had changed in its geometry. Something was watching, and it was not done yet. Marcus Webb did not take warnings. This was, in the accounting of his life, both his greatest professional asset and the flaw that ran through everything he had built, the way a crack runs through load-bearing stone, invisible from the surface, structural in its consequence. He had been told no by banks, and he had found other banks. He had been told no by city planners, and he had found other planners. He had been told no by 2 wives, and he had found ways to make the no's cost them more than the yes had cost him. He moved through the world as a man who had learned, early and thoroughly, that the people who said stop were almost always people who could be made to step aside. The man who had come to his office on Monday afternoon was different. Marcus understood this the way you understood certain things, not through analysis, but through the body, through the specific quality of stillness that some presences carried into a room. Dante Caruso had sat across from him and spoken about lease renewals in the measured tone of someone who had come to discuss lease renewals, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation he had shifted, without raising his voice or changing his posture, into something else. He had said Maya Santos's name once. He had not said it as a question or a preamble. He had said it the way you placed a fact on a table with the finality of something that did not require discussion. What comes next regarding Ms. Santos, Dante had said, is going to be watched carefully by people who watch things carefully. I wanted you to be aware of that before any further decisions were made. He had then returned to the lease renewal. Marcus had spent the rest of Monday evening trying to identify who Dante Caruso was beneath the holding company structure and the careful distance he maintained between his name and the things that bore it. What he found was partial the legitimate surface of a man who owned commercial real estate and made certain investments and was known in the Garrison district in a way that suggested he was regarded there with the specific respect that came not from affability, but from the understanding that he was someone you did not create problems for. What Marcus could not find was the rest of it, the full shape of the man beneath the surface, the specific form that being watched carefully would take. This was what produced in Marcus, over the following days, not caution. He was not built for caution, but something that looked like caution from the outside while being, internally, the rearrangement of strategy. He was not going to stop. He was going to be smarter. Maya noticed the change in his behavior on Tuesday, and Wednesday the deliberate absence of the manufactured discipline problems, the withdrawal of the ambient pressure that had characterized the previous week. He spoke to her in normal professional registers. He did not manufacture reasons to call her into the office. He submitted a response to Gregory Park's letter that was, according to Gregory, surprisingly measured in its tone. Don't mistake the quiet for resolution, Gregory told her on Wednesday. Men like Webb recalibrate. They don't surrender. Maya knew this. She had worked alongside Marcus Webb for 14 months, and she understood the grammar of his behavior. The withdrawal of visible pressure was not the end of pressure. It was the compression of it, the gathering of it into a form that would be harder to document, harder to anticipate, harder to defend against. She came home on Wednesday evening and found Lily at the kitchen table with a drawing she presented with the ceremony reserved for significant works. It was a picture of two people sitting on a park bench, rendered in crayon with the particular anatomy of 5-year-old portraiture: large round heads, stick arms of varying length, enormous eyes that managed to convey expression. One figure had dark hair. The other had a serious face, which Lily had achieved by drawing the mouth as a perfectly straight line rather than a curve. That's you and the coffee man, Lily said. Maya looked at the drawing for a long time. The coffee man, she repeated. He had coffee at the park, Lily said, with the air of someone clarifying an obvious classification system. Can I use the purple for his coat? Maya gave her the purple crayon and put the drawing on the refrigerator between a painting of a rainbow horse and a careful rendering of Edmund the rabbit, and she stood there looking at it for longer than the situation strictly required. Then she took out her phone. She had been composing and deleting a message to Dante for 2 days. Not about Marcus, she had Gregory for Marcus, and Gregory was sufficient. This was something else, something that existed in the territory of the personal, which was the territory she had been most careful about. She typed. Lily drew a picture of the park. You have a serious face in crayon. She sent it before she could reconsider. His response came in 3 minutes. I've been told that before. She stared at the message and felt something happen in her chest that she was done pretending was only coffee or adrenaline or the coincidental overlap of two people's geography. She typed, I want to say thank you properly. Not for anything specific. For the whole of it. If you're willing to let me. His response, Saturday. Same park. Bring Lily. I know where the good bagels are. She put the phone in her pocket and went to check the soup, and she was smiling in a way that she would not have been able to explain and did not try to. Thursday came and Thursday was quiet. And Thursday evening Dante received a call from Sal that changed the quality of the week. He made a move, Sal said. Webb. He's filed a counter-complaint with the Department of Labor, a complaint against Maya Santos for theft of proprietary documents. He's claiming she forwarded internal company files to unauthorized parties. Dante was very still. Did she? She forwarded case-related documents to her own personal email address and to Gregory Park's office, both of which are standard procedure when building an employment complaint. He's characterizing it as theft. That won't hold legally. No, but he didn't file it with the city. He filed it with the state board, different jurisdiction from where the original complaint sits. Different investigators. He's trying to create parallel proceedings that complicate each other. Sal paused. And here's the thing. The counter-complaint names Maya Santos by full name and lists her home address. Standard requirement for estate filing. But his attorneys also included her daughter's school. They'll claim it was procedural. It wasn't. The last piece landed with the weight it was intended to carry. He put the school in the filing, Dante said. He's telling her he knows where her daughter is. Dante stood. He looked out the window of his apartment at the city below, at the grid of lights, the movement of people whose lives were not touching this moment. He thought about a 5-year-old with a map stick who said exactly what she saw without calculating the cost. He thought about Maya in the parking garage, the posture of someone who had learned to endure by making herself efficient about it. He had maintained careful distance, careful restraint, because he understood the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. But Marcus Webb had put a child's school in a legal filing, and that was no longer a situation Dante was going to address with careful distance. "Where is Webb tomorrow?" he asked. "Dinner at the Aldridge Hotel. Standing Friday reservation." "I'll be at the Aldridge," Dante said. He called Maya. She answered on the second ring, and from the background sounds the television at low volume. The quiet of a late evening after a child was in bed. He knew she was home, that Lily was asleep, that she was in the part of the day when she was allowed to put down the performance of managing everything. "Dante." She said his name with the slightly different register she had developed for it, not professional, not managed. "Are you home?" "Yes." "What's wrong?" She read the quality of the call immediately. Marcus Webb filed a counter-complaint today. State jurisdiction. Gregory already knows and will explain the legal dimensions tomorrow. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." A silence. "What's the counter-complaint?" "He's claiming you forwarded proprietary documents to unauthorized parties. He's characterizing emails you sent to Gregory as theft." "That's completely standard. Gregory told me to do that." "I know. Gregory knows. It won't hold." He paused. "But it's not supposed to hold legally. It's supposed to create noise." Another pause, longer. "The filing included your home address and your daughter's school. His attorneys will say it was required contact information, but the choice to include the school specifically was deliberate." The silence this time was different. Longer. In the length of it, he could hear something that was not fear exactly, but the particular quality of a person confronting the full dimensions of something she had been managing in pieces and was now seeing whole. "He's telling me he knows where Lily goes to school," she said. "Yes." "He put that in a legal document to tell me he knows where my daughter is." "Yes." A silence. Then her voice, very controlled. "Is she safe? Tonight, is she safe?" "Yes. Tonight, she is safe. I can say that with certainty." She exhaled. The sound of someone releasing a breath held since he had first said, "There's something else." "What are you going to do?" she asked. He considered how to answer this honestly and within the limits of what she needed to know. "I'm going to make something clear," he said, "that I made insufficiently clear on Monday." "What does that mean?" "It means that after tomorrow, Marcus Webb will not put your daughter's school in another document. He will not think about your daughter's school. He will not think about you in any register except the legal one, which Gregory will handle and which he will lose." She was quiet. "The thing you said about complicated to explain," she said. "Your world. The distance you maintain." "Yes. When you say you're going to make something clear, am I going to be comfortable with what it involves? No one will be physically harmed. I don't operate that way in situations like this. What I have is leverage, financial, informational, the kind that comes from knowing where every structural weakness in a man's empire sits and being willing to speak to it directly. He will understand that continuing in the direction he is going will cost him more than he is prepared to pay. He will believe this because it will be true." Another silence. Then, "Okay," she said. "Just that. Not agreement exactly. The acknowledgement of a person who had made a decision about trust, who had looked at the available information and arrived at a conclusion and was willing to stand in it." "Get some sleep," he said. "Dante." A pause. "Thank you for calling me first." He held the phone for a moment after she'd said it. "Of course," he said, and ended the call. The Aldrich Hotel on Friday evening was the kind of establishment that existed in the space between legitimate luxury and the social economy of men who needed to be seen in certain rooms with certain people. Marcus Webb had a standing reservation on Friday evenings, a booth in the northeast corner, the same booth he had occupied for 6 years. This was information Dante had obtained not through surveillance, but through the simple fact of having owned, for 3 of those 6 years, a 15% stake in the Aldridge's holding company. He was at the bar when Marcus arrived. He did not hurry. He sat with a glass of water and watched Marcus settle into his booth and order, and he thought about the specific shape of the conversation he was going to have, the particular register it needed to take. He had not come here in anger. Anger was a blunt instrument. What he needed tonight was something sharper. He picked up his water and crossed the restaurant. Marcus looked up when Dante's shadow fell across his table, and for a single unguarded second something moved across his face, the flash of a man understanding that the world had followed him into his private Friday evening. Mr. Caruso. The recovery was quick. He was good at recovery. I didn't know you were a member here. I'm not, Dante said. He sat down across from Marcus without being invited, with the ease of a man who did not require invitations, and he placed his glass on the table and looked at Marcus Webb with the particular quality of attention that made the room feel smaller and the table feel very close. This isn't a conversation I want to have here, Marcus said. I know, Dante said. That's why we're having it here. Marcus looked at him. He picked up his drink. He set it back down. The counter complaint, Dante said. The state filing. The inclusion of the child's school. He said each item the way you placed objects on a table one at a time, with space between them. I want to understand your thinking. It was procedurally required, it wasn't. Dante's voice did not change. The state filing requires current address. It does not require the educational institution of a dependent. Your attorneys made a specific choice to include it. I want you to tell me what that choice was intended to communicate. Marcus held his gaze. The calculation was visible. He was assessing what Dante knew, what he could be told, what the cost of various answers was. I don't respond well to ultimatums, Marcus said. The meeting on Monday felt like one. It was information, Dante said. This is different. How is it different? Because on Monday, I was giving you an opportunity to make a different decision. Tonight, I'm telling you what the decision is going to be, and the variable is only how much it costs you before we arrive at it. He leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but with the particular reduction of distance that communicated he was speaking to Marcus specifically, with his complete attention. The counter-complaint will be withdrawn. By Monday, your attorneys will cite a procedural error. Gregory Park will receive the withdrawal notice, and the matter will be closed. Marcus stared at him. You don't tell me. I have the Aldrich. 15% of the holding structure. I have the Meridian Tower lease, which you are 4 months from needing to renew under terms that I set. I have conversations with 3 of your city council contacts recorded legally in single-party consent jurisdictions, in which you discussed the suppression of a government complaint. And I have 47 minutes of parking structure footage submitted to the district attorney's office as of this morning as part of a preliminary inquiry. He held Marcus's gaze. That inquiry can be expanded or it can remain preliminary. That is the variable I mentioned. The color had changed in Marcus Webb's face. Not dramatically, he was composed enough for that, but in the specific way that blood moves when a body understands it has reached the end of a road, and there is no continuation in the direction it was traveling. You can't prove that any of this connects to, I don't need to prove it. Proof is for courts. What I need is for you to believe that I have the patience and the resources to make your next 5 years cost more than anything you have built is worth. And I need you to understand, he paused here, very briefly, and when he continued his voice had dropped to something barely above quiet, that the child's school will not appear in any document, any filing, any communication, any conversation. That if Maya Santos experiences any form of further retaliation, any contact from you or your representatives outside the legal channel Gregory Park has established, the preliminary inquiry becomes a full one. These are not conditions I am proposing. They are the shape of what happens next. Marcus Webb sat across from him and looked at a man who had, in 11 minutes, disassembled the framework of his leverage and replaced it with a different framework entirely. He looked at Dante the way you looked at something you had significantly and irrecoverably misjudged. What is she to you? Marcus asked. It was the question of a man trying to understand what he was actually dealing with. Dante picked up his water glass. "Someone I will not allow to be harmed," he said. "That's sufficient." He stood and left the restaurant without looking back, and Marcus Webb sat alone in the northeast corner of the Aldridge Hotel and turned the shape of the conversation over in his mind and arrived, slowly and completely, at the understanding that he was done. Not finished. The company would continue. The 20 years of built relationships would persist. The empire would go on in some form, because he was that kind of man, and he had been doing this long enough to know how to absorb a blow without going under. But done with this particular direction. Done with Maya Santos as a target. Done with the arrogance of a man who had believed his city would not produce something he could not outmaneuver. He had made a mistake in the parking garage. He understood this now in a way he had not fully understood in the week between the event and this evening, not the mistake of the act itself, though that had been the act of a man who had been drinking and whose temper had that night exceeded his management of it, but the mistake of what followed, of believing that the woman with the folders and the bruise on her cheek and the restraint not to cry in his presence was simply enduring, of not considering that endurance had direction, of assuming that the absence of immediate consequence meant the absence of eventual consequence. He had been wrong about that. He was rarely wrong about things, and the experience of being wrong about something that had seemed so containable, so minor in the landscape of all the things he controlled, sat in him like a stone. He signaled for the check. He paid it. He walked out into the city he had owned, in various ways, for 20 years, and he thought about the man who had sat across from him and spoken about lease renewals before speaking about Maya Santos, and he understood that Dante Caruso had given him a choice on Monday, and he had made the wrong one, and now the choices had narrowed to the shape of a single door, and the only sensible thing left was to walk through it. He called his attorney that night and told him to withdraw the countercomplaint. His attorney asked why. He said procedural error. His attorney, who had practiced law for 30 years and recognized the tone of a client not explaining everything, said understood and did not ask again. Maya received the call from Gregory Park on Monday morning at 9:45. "The counter-complaint has been withdrawn," Gregory said. Marcus Webb's attorneys cited a procedural error in the state filing. "The original complaint is now the only active proceeding, and with the counter-complaint gone, we're in a significantly stronger position." Maya was standing in the kitchen in the 20 minutes before she had to leave for school drop-off. She looked at Lily's drawings on the refrigerator, the harbor city, the rainbow horse, the crayon park bench with its serious-faced figure in purple. "That's it," she said. "Just withdrawn. Just withdrawn. In my experience, when a party with resources withdraws a filing citing procedural error, it means someone has made clear to them that continuing is more expensive than stopping. I don't know who or how. I don't ask." A pause. "What I know is that you are in an excellent legal position, and Marcus Webb's attorneys are now communicating in a register that suggests they understand this matter is going to resolve in your favor." She thanked him and ended the call. She thought about Friday evening, about the knowledge she had carried all weekend that something was happening, that Dante was in a room somewhere, making something clear in the way that certain things needed to be made clear. She had not asked him about it afterward. He had texted her on Friday night done, and she had texted back thank you, and then Saturday had come, and with it the park and the bagels, and the three of them walking the tree-lined path with Lily between them holding both their hands, which Lily had engineered without consultation and with the unassailable logic of a 5-year-old who saw no reason why things could not be arranged as she preferred them. Maya had looked at Dante over Lily's head during that walk, at the serious face that was not entirely serious in that moment, at the quality of his attention turned on her daughter, careful and genuine, and without the performance adults often applied to children. She had thought about what it meant to trust someone, not the trust of certainty, the trust that was an act, a chosen extension of faith based on evidence, based on watching someone behave consistently across a series of moments in which they could have behaved otherwise and chose not to. "Mama," Lily's voice from the hallway. "We're going to be late." "I know, baby." 2 seconds. She put the lunchbox in the backpack and zipped it and took her daughter to school and came back to her desk and did her work. Marcus arrived at 9:30 and did not call her into his office, did not manufacture anything, sent 2 emails requesting routine documents in the professional tone of a man who had decided, for reasons he was not going to explain, to treat his executive assistant as a person whose time was worth respecting. The settlement offer from Webb Development arrived 6 weeks later. It was, Gregory said, generous in a way that confirmed what he had suspected, that Marcus Webb's attorneys had advised their client in the clearest possible terms that proceeding to a formal hearing was not in his interest, and that the client had, for once in his professional life, listened. Maya sat at her kitchen table on the evening the offer arrived and read it 3 times. Gregory had walked her through the numbers on the phone, had explained what each component represented, had told her that he considered it fair and that he considered it an acknowledgement, even if an unspoken one, that what had been done was wrong. Maya had listened to him and thanked him and ended the call, and then sat with the document for a long time in the kitchen quiet. It would not give her back the 14 months. It would not give back the first morning she had pressed concealer over a bruise with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned to manage visible evidence of invisible damage. It would not give back the evenings she had arrived home exhausted past the point of feeling and watched Lily sleep in her animal pajamas and felt the gap between the life she was living and the life she had once believed was possible. But it would give her room. It would give her the specific kind of freedom that came with financial stability, the freedom to choose what came next rather than being required to endure what was current. And that was, in the precise accounting of her situation, everything she had needed and had not allowed herself to believe she might get. Maya accepted the settlement. It was enough to cover 8 months of expenses without the job, enough to take the time she had been refusing to allow herself. To think about the teaching certificate renewal. To think about the classroom she had been 3 months from having a decade ago, before her life had taken its different direction. To think about what it looked like to build something rather than simply survive something. She gave notice the following Monday. She wrote the letter at her kitchen table on Sunday evening with Lily asleep in the next room and Edmund the rabbit visible through the open door. She signed it Maya Santos and printed it and put it in an envelope. She left it on Marcus's desk at 8:15 on Monday morning. At 5 o'clock on her last Friday, she gathered the small personal items from her desk: a plant, a photo of Lily, a book she had been reading on lunch breaks for 3 months, and she rode the elevator down and nodded at Pete, who said, "You won't be back on Monday, will you?" With the certainty of a man who read the movement of a building the way sailors read water. "No," she said. "Good," he said, and meant it simply, without elaboration, which was exactly the right thing. She walked out of Meridian Tower for the last time and stood on the sidewalk in the early evening cold and felt the absence of the building behind her, not as loss, but as space. Room. The particular quality of air that existed when something you had been carrying for a long time was no longer there. She had expected the moment to feel more dramatic. She had spent 14 months imagining what it would feel like to leave on the difficult evenings, the evenings after documented incidents and low-grade humiliations, and the daily labor of not letting any of it reach Lily, and the version of the moment she had imagined was bigger than this. More categorical. A door closing audibly. But it was just a sidewalk with fossil ferns in the concrete, and the building behind her was simply a building, and what she felt was not dramatic at all. It was quiet. It was the quiet of something resolved, not triumphantly, not with fireworks or speeches, but in the way that most things that mattered were resolved, which was quietly, and over time, and by the steady accumulation of small decisions that pointed in the same direction until the direction became permanent. She called Dante. "How was the last day?" he said. "Quiet. Normal. He didn't speak to me." She paused. "I'm standing on the sidewalk outside the building. I've been walking over this sidewalk for 14 months, and I never noticed it has these little fossils pressed into the concrete. Fern shapes. Someone must have dropped a leaf when the concrete was wet, and then it set." She looked down at them. "I've walked over them 100 times. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him, faintly, moving to a window. "When Lily's done with school tomorrow," he said, "I want to take you both somewhere." "Where?" "North of the city. 40 minutes. It's on the water. There's a harbor." She felt something happen in her chest, the same something that happened in the lobby, at the park, at the restaurant table in the yellow light, the feeling she had been done pretending was anything other than what it was. "Lily will lose her mind," she said. "I know. She'll want to map it. I'll bring materials." Maya stood on the sidewalk with the fossil ferns at her feet and the cold air coming off Meridian Street and the building that had taken 14 months behind her, and she thought about what it meant to be at the beginning of something. Not simply at the end of a hard thing, though she was that too, but at the beginning, specifically, of something she had not planned for and could not fully see, but could feel the shape of the way you could feel weather before it was weather, before it had a name. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow. The harbor. I'll pick you up at 10. She drove home through streets that felt, tonight, like they were pointing somewhere different. She picked up Lily from Mrs. Petrova and held her longer than usual in the doorway, her nose in Lily's hair. "Mama," Lily said, "you're squishing." "I know. Sorry." She released her, and Lily ran off to find Edmund the rabbit, and Maya stood in the hallway and let herself feel all of it. The relief and the grief that sometimes came with relief, the fear of the open space that was also the exact thing she had needed, the careful and tentative beginning of something she did not yet have a name for, but recognized the way you recognize things that were true by the particular way they settled in the body and stayed. She sat in the living room later with the silver moon-patterned blanket across her legs and the quiet of a Friday evening around her. And she took the plain white card from her wallet. She had kept it there since the lobby, behind the emergency 20, and she looked at the handwritten number and thought about everything it represented. Everything that had followed from the moment she had taken it in the lobby of Meridian Tower from the hand of a man she did not yet know. She had not expected any of this. She had walked into a parking garage on a Thursday evening with her arms full of folders, and she had absorbed an impact that was not the first, and then the dark end of the level had opened, and something had changed in the geometry of what she was enduring. She had not asked for it. She had not known she was the kind of person who would be seen by someone like Dante Caruso, and that being seen would set in motion the slow and precise dismantling of the thing that had been diminishing her. She had not asked for it, but she had been brave enough to receive it. She had been brave enough to say, "I don't know what to do with that," and then figure out what to do with it anyway. Brave enough to call her own situation by its name and document it, and stand in a room with a voice memo running and look the man who had hit her in the face and tell the truth about what she was doing and why. Brave enough to sit on a park bench and say thank you properly, to book a table at a restaurant with yellow lights and say I am asking you to dinner, clearly and on purpose. Brave enough to hold a plain white card in her wallet behind the emergency 20 and know that it represented something she was still in the process of understanding, and to choose that process over the safety of not understanding it at all. That was the thing no one could give her and no one could take away. That had always been hers. She thought about the dinner on Garrison and 4th, the week before the harbor, the table near the window, and the things they had talked about in the territory that was simply them. He had told her about the city he'd left at 19. About the books and the system for organizing them that made sense to no one else. She had told him about the teacher she had wanted to be, the classroom she had been 3 months from having before her life went a different direction. That perhaps once Lily was older and the settlement was in hand, it might be possible to go back. "Would you?" he had asked. "If it were possible." "I think so. I've been good at surviving things. But I don't think I'm meant to just survive things. I think I'm meant to build something." She looked at him. "Does that sound naive?" "No," he said. "It sounds like the most precise thing you've said tonight." She had put her hand over his after he told her about his mother. He had told her simply about the 11 years, about the cost, about the 14-year-old who could not do anything. He had said not always well and not always wisely when she told him he had been doing something about it ever since. The honesty of both parts was the thing she had held in her hands on the walk back to her car, the way you held something fragile and significant carefully, with both hands, without squeezing. He had turned his palm over and held her hand. They had stayed like that for a moment in the yellow restaurant light, and neither of them had spoken, because there was nothing to say that the gesture had not already said more precisely. She put the card back in her wallet. She turned off the lamp. In the dark of the living room, the crescent moon night light did its quiet work in the hallway, and the city outside the window went on in its continuous and indifferent way. And inside the apartment, the particular life of Maya Santos was still, resting, preparing for what came next. She was not the woman who had walked into that parking garage believing that endurance was the same thing as living. She was not the woman who had said fine in automatic response to questions about how she was. She was not the woman who had covered a bruise with concealer and measured her worth in the return of a powerful man's attention. The parking structure had happened and a man had appeared from the dark, and something had started moving. and it had moved through courts and complaints and park benches and hotel restaurants, and a harbor that Lily did not yet know was waiting for her map stick. And it had brought Maya Santos to a Friday evening in her own apartment, her daughter asleep in the next room, and something new and careful and unfinished growing in the space that had been cleared. There are people who survive things and people who are built by them. And the difference is not strength in the way we usually mean strength, not the absence of fear or the capacity to endure without breaking. The difference is what you do with the space that opens when the worst of it is finally over. Whether you fill it back up with the same shape of things that diminished you, or whether you stand in the space and recognize it, for the first time, as room. Maya Santos had room now. She intended to use it. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment in the Garrison district where the books were organized in a system that made sense only to him, a man sat with his own Friday evening and thought about a harbor and a child with a map stick and the way a woman had put her hand over his in a yellow-lit restaurant and said nothing, because the gesture had already said the right thing more precisely than words could. He had built a great deal in his life. Things that were complicated to explain, that existed at a careful remove from the people who came into it. He had told himself the remove was intentional, and the intentionality was its own form of integrity, that a man could be dangerous in certain registers and still maintain clean borders between those registers and the rest of what he was, that precision and restraint were sufficient, that the full accounting of a life could be satisfied by what you protected and preserved even if it did not include what you allowed yourself to want. He thought now that he had been missing a word. That the full measure of a life required not just what you protected and preserved, but what you allowed yourself to receive. What you let through the careful distance and into the actual territory of yourself, not because it was safe, not because it was certain, but because some things were worth the exposure. He had spent 20 years in the machinery of this city. He had moved through its pressures and its silences and its economy of leverage and consequence with the practiced ease of someone who had learned its grammar as a young man and never stopped being fluent in it. He had been, by any objective measure, very good at his life. He had protected the people under his care, had operated by a code that made distinctions he considered important, had built things that would outlast him in the same way that careful, deliberate things tended to outlast careless ones. But he had sat in a parking structure in November and watched something happen to a woman he did not know. And instead of filing it in the category of things that required no action, he had found that he could not file it, could not move past it, could not make himself neutral about a bruise that had not been his to witness, and a resilience he had no claim on, and a 5-year-old he had no reason to know who had looked at his face and said what she saw without calculating whether saying it would cost her anything. Something had come through the distance. He had let it. He was not afraid of it. He was simply present with it, in the way he had not been present with anything in a very long time, not managing it, not keeping it theoretical, but carrying it the way you carried things that were real, which was to say with both hands and with care and without pretending you were not carrying them. Tomorrow he was picking up a woman and her daughter at 10 o'clock. He was taking them to the harbor. He was going to watch a 5-year-old map it with a stick she would select herself because it needed to be exactly the right weight for the task, and she would know the right weight when she found it. That was, he thought, a very good thing to have to look forward to. And so they would go north along the road that ran beside the water, to a harbor where the boats moved slowly and the light came off the surface in the particular way of mornings that held nothing except what was in them. A woman who had been brave enough, in all the ways that mattered. A man who had spent 20 years in the machinery of a city and had finally let something matter more than the machinery. And a child between them who would grow up knowing, without ever needing to be told, what it looked like when two people chose each other carefully and honestly and without reservation. She would map the harbor. She would name the parts. She would explain, with the authority of someone who had already mapped a sandbox city and understood how harbors worked, exactly where the boats should go and what the mountain range beyond the water was called, and whether the stick she had brought was precisely the right instrument for the task, or whether a different one, found on the shore, might serve better. And they would listen. That was the ending. Not grand. Not the kind that required music or ceremony or any of the large vocabulary that people reached for when they wanted to make a moment feel significant. Just two people who had found each other at the exact intersection of the right moment and the right attention, standing on a shore with a child who saw everything clearly and said so, in a harbor waiting to be mapped. Just that. Just them. Just the water and the light, and whatever came next. Thank you so much for staying until the end. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now were made for you. I think you will love them. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one.